everyone, and welcome to this edition of Budding Solutions, a series on disease and pest management in cannabis sativa. My name is Kim Leonberger, and I'm an Extension Associate in the Plant Pathology Department at the University of Kentucky. In this episode, we are going to take a closer look at aphids. To discuss this important insect issue, I would like to introduce Marguerite Bolt. Marguerite is the Hemp Extension Specialist in the Department of Agronomy at Purdue University. She received her Master's of Science in Entomology from Purdue University and her Bachelor's of Science in Entomology from Michigan State University. She uses online resources, field days, seminars, large and small outreach events, and one-on-one consults to reach her stakeholders. Her current research focuses on studying suitable hemp cultivars for Indiana and addressing agronomic production questions. Marguerite is going to share a few slides with us about this insect, and then we will have time for a few questions. Welcome, Marguerite.
Thanks, Kim. I'm excited to talk about aphids and why aphids suck. There are lots of different aphid pests of hemp, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them today. My name is Marguerite Bolt. I'm the Hemp Extension Specialist at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, and let's get started. So aphids are true bugs in the order Hemiptera in the family Aphidae. They can cause a decline in plant health with high populations. Talk a little bit about the life cycle and how they can achieve those high populations. But they can also spread pathogens. This includes fungi, bacteria, and viruses. And two of the well-known viruses that they spread include potato virus Y and cucumber mosaic virus. So you kind of have both issues that you have to deal with. You have to deal with them actually sucking the fluid out of the plant and causing a decrease in productivity, but also spreading different pathogens. There are several different species that have been observed on hemp. I'm going to talk about aphids kind of generally in this talk, but you'll see lots of photos specifically of cannabis aphid, since that is one of the most predominant species that we see on hemp. We also have rice root aphid, which are primarily found in the root structures of the plant or around the roots, but you can also catch adult forms or nymphs crawling up the plant. I have a cool photo of that later. Green peach aphid, black bean aphid, and cotton aphid are also reported on hemp. It's important to understand the morphology of aphids for identification. So they have soft pear-shaped bodies. I have this diagram here that gives you a general idea of what aphids are going to look like, regardless of species. They also have these really interesting structures that are going to be important for identification called cornicles on the rear of the aphid's body. You can think of these as sort of like exhaust pipes. They have one on each side and are going to be important to look for, again, for proper identification. They also have relatively long legs and antennae compared to their body length. And then for the winged form, their wings are also relatively long. They have a tapered rear called the cauda, and then they have piercing sucking mouth parts, which you can't see in this photo, but they have sort of a pokey straw mouth part where they can puncture plants and suck up fluid. Now, for identification of the life stages, we have nymphs, which I've circled here. These don't have wings, and they have multiple what we call instars where they won't have wings, but they'll look really similar to the adults. Then we have adults that don't have wings. You'll often see these on the plants in the early to midsummer, or if you're indoor when populations are still low. And then we have winged adults. These are called alates. So these occur under two conditions. When plants become overcrowded, so the populations of aphids are really high, and we need winged formed adults to go find new resources. And then during the winter life cycle, they need wings. They're going to find a mate so they can mate and lay eggs. So you can see winged forms at multiple points during the growth cycle. And if you're scouting regularly, you likely will see winged forms at some point during the scouting growth cycle, especially if you're not able to really manage the aphid population. There are two distinct life cycles that are important for aphids. We have a summer life cycle and a winter life cycle. The summer life cycle consists of many generations. So this is when you're going to have your rapid population growth, when you kind of see that explosion of aphids that seems sometimes like it's overnight. This is going to be asexual reproduction. And I have a cool photo in the next slide to show that. But this is when you have female populations that are actually reproducing asexually, and you get that rapid population expansion. During the winter life cycle, you have those winged females that are reproducing with males to lay eggs. And this is just one generation. They'll lay eggs, and then those adults are going to die off. So I mentioned that I have some cool photos. So we have what are called viviparous pathogenic reproduction. So viviparous just means live birth. So during the summer life cycle, aphid females are actually giving live birth, asexual reproduction, or parthenogenic reproduction to aphids. So pretty cool stuff there, a little bit sci-fi. And then in that winter life cycle, I mentioned you have mating, you have males and females that are reproducing to lay eggs. And these are those eggs. These are cannabis aphid specific photos. They have these little black eggs that you can see on the underside of the hemp leaves. Many of these aphid species I mentioned are widely distributed and found across North America. Cannabis aphid is one that has been recorded in, I think, most of the United States at this point, and you can find these aphids in indoor and outdoor growing spaces. In this photo, I have rice root aphid, which is commonly reported in indoor production. Not that it can't be seen outdoors, but a lot of indoor growers are actually struggling with this pest and with managing it. So you're not necessarily safe from aphids, whether you're indoors or outdoors. You can see them in both growing environments. Though in indoor production, you're going to typically get aphids brought in on plants, and we'll talk about that in management in a couple slides. But in outdoor systems, you have aphids existing in the environment, moving onto the plants. In indoor systems, especially in those highly controlled environments, you need to have good sanitation practices so you don't bring in the insect pest. Some aphid species have primary and secondary host plants. So in the summer, they have one host, and in the winter, they have other host plants. And then some species are generalists and some are specialists. So for the case of green peach aphid, it has multiple hosts that it can feed on. In the case of cannabis aphid, as far as we know, cannabis plants are the only species that it's going to have as its primary host. Signs and symptoms are going to be critical for identifying what is actually causing damage to your plant. So symptoms are going to be how your plant responds. For aphids, you may see yellowing, like in this photo here, we have the tips of the leaves kind of yellowing. The overall color of the leaves is kind of a pale green to yellow. You may have wilting. Plants could look overall just sickly. And then if populations are high enough, you may actually see plant death. And this is just from the aphid feeding and having high populations, not from the pathogens that they could vector and spread to the plant. And that could be a whole different set of symptoms. And then the signs are the evidence of the pest. And this is going to be important for accurate diagnosis. So we have honeydew, which is a sticky waste product from aphids. Kind of think of it like their poo. They're going to exude this, when they're feeding, and that's going to drop on surfaces below them. It's important for identification. You can have cast skins. As aphids develop, they have to shed their exoskeleton to grow. You can look at that. And then oftentimes you'll actually see aphids on the plants. So to look for signs, there are some things that you can do to increase your accurate diagnosis. So some of the symptoms I mentioned that aphids can cause can look like other things. They may look like some of the damage that mites cause, whiteflies, or even abiotic stress. And this is why finding those signs is going to be critical to confirm your diagnosis. So I mentioned honeydew. It's going to start out looking shiny, often on the tops of leaves, especially if you have aphids that are feeding on the bottoms of the leaves. They're going to release that exudate and it's going to fall on the upper leaf surface. Sometimes you'll even see ants. So ants are going to feed on that honeydew. They're also going to act like little bodyguards that are going to protect the aphids from predators and parasitoids. So ants can be another indicator that you have aphids. You may also see sooty mold growth. It grows on the honeydew. In this photo, you can see this sort of black, fuzzy looking growth on the leaves. That's actual sooty mold growing on the honeydew. So even if you don't see the sort of shiny, distinct look that you get from the honeydew, you may see the sooty mold, which is another indicator of aphids. We also have those cast skins. They're kind of white and fluffy looking. In this photo, you can see some cast skins that are actually stuck to the leaves. So that's another, again, sign that aphids are present. And then when looking for aphids, you can look on the undersides of leaves, the stems, the roots, or the flowering structures. It's going to be species dependent. Cannabis aphid, we're typically seeing them on the undersides of leaves, but I've seen them on other parts of the plants as well. So just a good general scan of the plant to look for aphids. You may want to actually identify which aphid you're dealing with. So a hand lens, something like 10x magnification is going to be sufficient to look at some of the morphology, or if you have a nice camera, a macro lens for your cell phone, you might actually be able to zoom in and get some pretty nice photos to help with identification. You can also monitor aphids with yellow sticky cards. This is more common in indoor growing environments where they're using yellow sticky cards to monitor for other pests like fungus gnats, thrips, or whiteflies. They will also catch those winged adult aphids. There are quite a few different management techniques you can use for aphids. Overall, maintaining healthy plants is just going to be important in general, but for aphids, you want to avoid applying high amounts of nitrogen fertilizer. So just finding that good balance for your plants to maintain adequate plant health. Sanitation practices cannot be understated. This is going to be especially critical for indoor environments where hopefully you have a really clean facility. You don't want to bring anything in, so inspecting plantlets before they come into your facility and having a quarantine space for any potentially infected or infested plants is going to be critical. Now, in outdoor systems, you want to do the same thing. If you're getting transplants, you want to inspect them and make sure they don't have aphids on them. You want to start the season strong. But again, indoor systems, aphid populations can really explode. So inspecting those plants is going to be critical. Removing early season hemp volunteers in outdoor systems is another technique. I mentioned that winter reproductive life cycle, they lay those eggs, and when those eggs hatch, those aphids need a food source. It may be much earlier than when you actually have hemp in the ground for your growing season, but having early season volunteers provides that food source and sort of gives a jump on the population. So removing those hemp volunteers in the early spring is another management practice. Some folks might use high pressure water spraying to actually physically spray the aphids off the plant. Sticky traps are usually better for monitoring because they're only catching those winged forms, except in the case, which is this is really cool, where sticky tape was placed on the stem of a hemp plant for rice root aphid, and you're actually getting the aphids that are crawling up the plant. And so you're doing some monitoring and catching some of those aphids. And then exclusion netting is another tool that is more common when you have semi-controlled environments where maybe you have roll-up sides and a high tunnel, and you can actually put fine mesh netting in the open spaces to try to reduce the movement of pests into your growing environment. There's also biological control agents that can be used for aphid management, which is really interesting because there are so many different ones that can attack aphids. We have both predators and parasitoids. We have ones that occur in the field. These are just out in nature and they'll move into the field and they'll consume the aphids. We have ladybird beetles, green and brown lacewings, minute pirate bugs, big-eyed bugs, which I have a photo here, aphid midges, which is a type of fly, syrphid flies, and parasitic wasps. I'll show you some photos in the next slides of those. And then you also have the option of purchasing these biological control agents from insectaries. You can purchase green lacewing, minute pirate bugs, several different species of parasitic wasps, and aphid midge flies. So in controlled environment, more growers are going to be interested in purchasing from an insectary because you don't have the movement of these beneficial organisms into your growing system. You are controlling the environment, so you can release those agents to help reduce your aphid population. But out in the field, we see quite a diversity of different predators and parasitoids. So I have some photos of different lady beetles that we see out in the field. So from left to right, we have the convergent lady beetle. We have a pink spotted lady beetle up in that top right corner. And then the bottom, we have multicolored Asian lady beetle. We have both the larval form in the bottom left and the adult form in the bottom right. The cool thing about lady beetles is that both the larval form and the adult form will feed on aphids. So we get pest control in both these life stages, which is not true for all of the biological control agents I'm going to show you. We also have some additional agents I mentioned. We have syrphid fly larvae in the top left. This is one where the larval form is going to consume aphids, but not the adult flies. We have those aphid midges up in that top right corner. So the pink maggot is actually consuming an aphid. So you have the larval form consuming the aphids. In the bottom right corner, we have minute pirate bug, which I mentioned you can also purchase from insectaries, but they are abundant out in the field. And in the bottom left, we have a green lacewing larva. So again, one that you can purchase, but they just occur out in the field. The adults don't feed on aphids, but the larval form are quite the ferocious predators. We also have parasitic wasps, which are really cool. Again, you can purchase some species to be released in your environment, and it's a common biological control agent used for aphids. So in the top left, we have a parasitic wasp actually stinging or depositing an egg into an aphid. And what happens is the aphid will turn into what we call a mummy. In the top right corner, we have this sort of bronze inflated looking aphid, and you actually have a parasitic wasp larva developing within that aphid. In the bottom right, we have those yellow sticky cards. So you can see on the left of that yellow sticky card, you have your winged aphid. On the right, you actually have a parasitic wasp. And then in that bottom left corner, you have right here, you can see up sort of the top of that photo, you have an aphid that has a hole in it, and that's where that parasitic wasp actually emerged from that aphid. There's also the insecticide option, and I always present this last because we have a lot of other tools to look at, and it's good to take a multifaceted approach when we look at pest management. With insecticides, you want to check with your state on what is actually registered for use. There's an EPA list, and then each state maintains their own list of registered products that can be used on hemp. And of course, the label is the law, so read the label, make sure you know how to apply the product and that it can be applied in your specific growing system. There's some insecticidal soaps and oils that can be used for aphids. There's several products that contain bacteria. And then my personal favorite are entomopathogenic fungi. There are a couple species that can be applied to control cannabis aphid and other aphid species. Now, it's important when you're using these biological products that have actual live spores that you apply when conditions are going to be right to facilitate the growth of the fungus. So you want to do it when humidity is high, UV light is low, and temperature is less than 86 degrees Fahrenheit for most of these fungi. I have a couple different resources that I think are helpful. Now, each land-grant university, for the most part, has their own diagnostic lab that growers can send samples to, or in some cases, photos for diagnosis. A lot of them prefer the physical sample, but sometimes that's just not feasible to do, especially with aphids. When you send them, you're going to want to put them in alcohol in a sealed container because they are soft-bodied and are prone to sort of desiccate or rot. There's also this really nice guide from Hemp Pests of Florida that has the aphid species I mentioned with some nice detailed photos of those, which might be useful to print out and have, or have it on your phone when you're identifying what kind of aphid you see in the field. Colorado State University has lots of different integrated pest management pages, including a highly detailed one on cannabis aphid. Pacific Northwest Pest Management Handbook also has a list of some products that are specific to aphid. So a great table there you can refer to, but again, check with your state. And then we have Purdue has a hemp website that has incidental insects, beneficial insects, and pest insects, including some information on aphids. I have a couple different social media accounts, Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find me under Purdue Hemp. And I want to thank you for your attention. Again, my name is Marguerite Bolt. My email is hemp@purdue.edu, and I hope you learned something about aphids today.
Thanks so much, Marguerite. That was a really great presentation. I know I certainly learned a lot. Just a couple of questions for you. The first one being you talked about that there are different types of controls, cultural, biological, and then your insecticides. How would you describe the efficacy of things like cultural practices or some of those biological controls when compared to, pesticides like insecticides?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things I like to present is we don't have the same kind of insecticide options for hemp. So we don't have the sort of conventional products that many other crops have. We mostly have biological or softer chemistries available for hemp, which do have a place, but I think this presents a really great opportunity to rely heavily on integrated pest management techniques like those cultural practices I mentioned and biological control agents. So it should not be understated that cultural practices, especially good sanitary practices and maintaining healthy plants, they should be the priority. They're low cost They don't require the application of anything, and it's a great way to start off on the right foot when you're producing the crop. Those biological control agents are widely used in controlled environments. There are several different insectaries in North America where people can can order those control agents and release them. So those techniques are really powerful and are great methods. I know out in the field, we see quite a surge of lady beetles occurring and really suppressing that pest population later in the season. So they should not be understated as a great technique. And then I kind of think of insecticides as a last resort. Maybe you went on vacation and you came back and you didn't scout your plants. You go, oh no, I need to apply an insecticidal soap. There are some of those tools available, but if you do things ahead of time, maintain a healthy plant, maintain an environment where you'll have biological control agents coming in or you're releasing them. Hopefully you don't have to use any of those insecticidal products.
Excellent. That sounds like there's a lot of really great options out there for folks. Next question for you. I know you've worked in the hemp space for quite a while and have a lot of different experiences. So what would you say is the best part about working with hemp?
The thing that excites me the most, especially during the growing season, is that I go out to the field and I almost always see something new, new and interesting, unique. I'll go out there and see an incidental insect that I haven't seen before or pest I haven't seen before. So there's always a learning opportunity. We're still trying to understand the plant. We haven't had that many production years after a long, decades long gap. And so I think for a lot of us in this space, it's just an opportunity to continually learn about the crop. So I just get really excited during the growing season to go out there and go, oh, what am I going to see today? What's going to be new to me?
Excellent. Yeah, definitely a lot to learn. I know I learn something new every time I step foot in the field too. So, excellent. One last question for you. So, I know that in your role, you spend a lot of time educating growers and the public about cannabis sativa and all the different aspects of it. So, can you talk a little bit about your work with how you connect growers to the research that's happening at Purdue?
Yeah, so we do maintain a website, which I try to, keep updated with current research information. We host field days, which attracts growers, webinars. We have a big event coming up that hopefully will attract lots of people. But I think the way that I've connected with growers the most, and I think a lot of extension educators still rely on just the good old phone call. So I have lots of people who get my contact information. I do a ton of one-on-one consulting, and then growers talk to each other. So I'll get a call from another grower that said, hey, I talked to, grower down the road who said they had a conversation with you about this pest. What information can you provide to me? So that one-on-one consulting or small group consulting is still one of the most powerful ways that I communicate this research and pest management information with my stakeholders. And then we do some large events. We have an event here at Purdue called Springfest, originally called Bug Bowl. I always set up a hemp display and talk about general crop production, but also the insects that are found on the plant. And that reaches a much broader audience. And I really get to connect with them and share information about the plant and all the cool bugs that we find on it.
Excellent. That sounds really exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Marguerite. I really, really appreciate it. To our viewers, thank you for joining us. We will list all of the resources that Marguerite identified in the description for the video, as well as some others, so please be sure to check that out. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next edition of Budding Solutions.